What's going on, everyone? New kind of video for you today. I decided that I am actually going to be making some tutorial videos starting today, and right now we're going to be building a short link generator using an API built with React and Material UI. First things first, let's take a look at what we'll be building and then get started with the actual project. We're just going to go straight into it, and I will walk you guys through on how to build it. It's a very easy and quick build, but it's some good practice using, Material UI as a CSS framework, using React, and then some hooks like use state, as well as some API fetching using Axios. So let's take a look at the code and then we can get started. This is what the project looks like. It's fairly simple. There's nothing really crazy to it as far as the design. I just wanted to use Material UI for the easy buttons and the easy input. After the project is done, feel free to add whatever you want. But basically, pretty much inside this input label, we will put in the link. Right now, we will put twitter.com as an example. I will hit enter, and then a loading bar will come through and dynamically load. Boom, there's our short link. And then if we click it, there we go. We're sent off to Twitter. So the actual link works. It is a fantastic little API that we're using from shortcode.com, which you guys can see right here. This is the documentation we will be using as far as how to use the API. It's fairly straightforward. It lays out everything you need. So let's us get straight into the project now, and I will show you guys how to start it. All right, guys. So to start things off, let me just preface it by saying that yes, I am going to be using my Windows PC for this to record. In the future, I will be using my MacBook just because it's a lot easier to develop things on Mac OS. But for right now, let's just stick to this. I am in my new projects directory. You can go in any directory you would like to be, wherever you're going to be putting your projects. So you can make a new projects folder on your desktop and put it in there. For right now, what we're going to do is I'm going to make a directory called link. And let's cd into link right now. And then the one we're going to be using create React app for this, just to bootstrap a fresh React project. Now, I will say that you should have some prior knowledge in React, developing in React, and you've probably built something with React. So if you don't have that, definitely take a tutorial video or something to learn the basics of React, and then you guys can come back into this and you'll have a better understanding of this. So going into it now, so we're going to do npx create -react -app, and we're just going to name this one link. Hit enter, and we're going to let that go. It's going to take a little bit. It's going to install React, React DOM, React scripts, and it's going to use the CRA template, which is the create React app template. So we're going to let that run, and then once we're done, we'll come right back to it. All right, y'all. This is Chau from the future now. I realized while I was editing the video back there that I am missing some clips. Unfortunately, Streamlabs screwed up a little bit and it cut off the video right when I was about to do something. So I need to come in the future and explain and show you exactly what was happening. So let me do that right now. I will show you exactly what it is we need to do, and then it will continue on from when I originally recorded the video. What we were doing so far was create React app ran, and we have everything we need. First thing that we need to do is we actually need to install some of the dependencies that we need. So in your command line, I also switched from CMD over to git bash, so that it might look a little confusing, but it's the same thing here. So we're going to do npm I. After that, you're going to put in Axios. Axios is going to be what we use to call our API, so it's a little bit easier than fetch. Same deal, but it's just a little bit easier using this library. And then if we pull up the Material UI website, we are also going to need the Material UI core. This is what's going to allow us to use some of the components within Material UI. So I will go in and paste that into this. So make sure to have a space between Axios and Material UI. You're going to hit enter. We're going to let that install for a second, and that's fairly quick. Cool. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cd into my links directory. Make sure, I wasn't in my directory. So let me do that one more time. So I just screwed up. I installed it in the wrong one. I'm going to run that again. Make sure you run it inside of your main branch of the file, so that way it's not all screwed up. We're going to hit code dot so I can open in my code editor. Okay, so not screwing up this time. The first thing that we're going to do to set up here is we are going to delete app.test.js because we don't need that, and we're also going to delete setup test. Okay, I usually always do that when I'm setting up my projects. I'm going to check package.json, and inside the dependencies, I should have Axios and I should have Material UI. So double check that those are actually installed. Okay. We're going to go into app.js. We're going to delete everything outside of header. Okay. We're going to delete that and then save it for now, and then go into app.css. Delete all this for now. Once we erase everything from app.js, I'm actually going to bring back app.c. Oop, where's my keyboard? .app here, and what we're going to do, if I can actually type here, is we're going to say height 100 VH. So I usually want to set that here so that some of my styling can actually work. We're going to come back into app.js, and we're going to do something. So we're going to take out logo here. At the very top, we're going to import a component from Material UI at first, and I use grid. A grid is going to be the first one, so we're going to destructure that out. I'm going to say at Material UI, so make sure we're importing that. All right, we're going to go here, and instead we're going to wrap this in its parentheses, so we can go multi-line here and style that up. Instead of the div, this is going to change to my grid. Right, class name app is going to stay on this, and we're going to add some props to the grid. So we're going to add container to make sure that this stays as a container. Direction, I want this to be a column at first. Okay, justify is going to be center, and then align items, make sure it's align items and not content. We want this to be center. Okay, inside of that for now, I'm going to have an H1 that says link generator. We're going to save that. Everything is going to format itself. Let me go back into my terminal here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do npm run start to start up the server so we can see what it looks like at first. That's going to run up my development server, and what we should see is when everything loads, boom, we have our link generator right smack in the middle, and this is where I will let past J finish out the tutorial. I will hop back in wherever I lost footage or wherever I need to be. So let's continue on the tutorial. Now, let's actually set up our API calling for right now and make sure that that is all set up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our here. We're going to create a new folder inside of the SRC folder, and we're going to call this API. This is usually how I like to structure things. Let's create another folder in the future since I know we're going to need it, and we're going to name that components. Okay, so we have API and components both living inside the SRC directory. Inside of API, we're going to do new file, and we're going to call this short code without the O, SHRT code.js. At the very top of shortcode.js, I'm going to import Axios from Axios. Okay, at the bottom here, we're going to do export default axios.create. We're inside the create method, we're going to pass an object, and inside that object, there is a parameter called base URL. And inside the base URL, this is going to pretty much autofill exactly what we need for the API call. So if we go back here to the API, you'll see an API base, and this is the base URL that we call in order to, call the API, right? So we're going to copy this, and inside of the string here, we are going to pass this API URL, and that is pretty much it. We don't need to set up anything else with Axios. This is pretty much going to be it as far as setting up the separate file for the API. Now, keep in mind, base URL, we do need to add some parameters to that. So if you take a look back at the API here, so that was the base, and then down here, we have to call shorten in order to actually shorten the given link. So we're going to do -shorten, and in this example, after shorten, we do $URL equals, and then whatever URL we are going to pass it. That is going to be what URL we're actually going to give it, and that's what we're going to go into right now. So let's go back to this. We don't need this anymore. We can close it. Inside the components folder, I'm going to create a component called search.js. And this is where my snippets are going to come in. The extension that I will link in the description is going to be what I'm using for this. RAFCE is what I'm going to type. If I hit tab, I instantly get a functional component using arrow functions in React. So let's in here, we're going to do search. And that's pretty much it. This is what's going to be our actual search input, but for right now, I want to make sure that everything is working. So let's go back into app.js and import this. I will get rid of this header. Search, I don't think this is, okay, there, good. So this is an autocomplete, but you do need to import it. Do not forget that. I tend to forget it sometimes. Let's close that. Go back to this, and you can see that search is now in our web page. So everything is hooked up very nicely. All right, now let's work primarily inside of search. So couple things that we need to import. We're going to need to destructure some components from Material UI in order for us to actually, create a form and create those input links. So the one thing that I'm going to import is going to be text field, as well as button and linear progress. Those are going to be pretty much these three components from Material UI are going to be what I'm going to be using for this tutorial. Now, inside of this right here, what we're going to do, oh, I almost forgot, we actually do need to use state hook from React because we will be utilizing some state as well. So do not forget use state. The last thing that we're probably going to need to import as well is going to be our actual API. So we're going to import shortcode from, make sure that oh boy. All right. We're gonna go back out one directory, so .. We're gonna go into API and then go into shortcode, and that way we have access to our shortcode. Okay, so those are gonna be the things that we're gonna need to import. Make sure you guys have those. Make sure you actually have Material UI installed and your API is all set up before doing this. Now, inside the actual return block, we're going to delete this div and we're just going to have a React fragment that is going to render first. Instead of this H1, I want to render a form. We're going to use an actual regular form. I'm not going to use, Material UI does have a form control component, but we're going to just stick to this for right now and use just the form. So inside the form, what I'm going to put first is going to be the text field. So the text field is going to go here, and I believe this is going to be a self-closing tag. Inside of the text field, I'm going to open this up so it's easier to read for the props. I want a label. Inside the label is going to be whatever goes inside the component. So I'm going to say input your link inside the label. The variant I want to use is going to be outlined. So I will put outlined in there. And then you'll see all this in a second. And then the third thing that I want to put in there is going to be my value. And my value that I want is going to be link. Now, what link is going to be our piece of state that we're actually going to use. So let's go up to the top right before our return. And I'm going to say const square brackets. We're going to say link and set link. If you guys are not used to the use state hooks, I would suggest you guys look it up on the documentation. They have some good docs and explanations as far as what this is, but pretty much link is our value of the piece of state. So whatever link is the actual state. Set link is our setter. So this is the function that we call to set link to a certain variable or value. In this case, use state is called, and the initial value of link is going to be an empty string. So nothing, so pretty much nothing, is going to be the value as far as right now when the component is initialized. So value is equal to an empty string. That will be our text field for right now, and we're going to add some other things to it. The thing right below our text field that I want is going to be our button. So button, make sure I spell button right. Close that, and inside it, I'm going to say submit. Couple props that I want inside button is going to be our variant, I believe, is going to be, let's do contained, I believe is going to be one of them. And then the color I want is primary, but feel free to look at the docs on Material UI and look at what colors you would like to use. Let's save this and take a look at what we have so far. So as you can see, we have our input here. This is the outline variant, and this is our button. It is in a row, so I will need to, we're just gonna do some inline styling here. So we're gonna say style equals takes an object, and we're gonna say display flex, and then we want flex direction to be column. And then let's save that, go back, and then as you can see, we have it in the column which way we want it. I will add some margin bottom to the, to the text field here. So same thing, I'm going to add a style, inline styling, no need for CSS here. We're just going to do something simple since we don't need much. We're going to do margin bottom, and we're just going to add 20 pixels to this, and then let's see how that looks. Perfect. That's exactly the way we want it. Everything works just fine. I love the way that the Material UI components look, so that's why we're opting for it. So we don't need to worry about the CSS. If you guys have watched my streams or just know me, you understand that CSS is my kryptonite. So something like Material UI is definitely an awesome library or framework just to use and not worry about. And all you need to do is focus on getting the things to work. Okay, so we have everything hooked up. Now let's get into the actual logic of things. So on the text field, we want to add a onChange prop, and what onChange is going to do, right? So it's not this right here. So it's going to be curly braces, and we're going to add a callback function to it. And what we want to do is we're going to pass e to our onChange, and we're going to call set link. So we're actually calling set link, and we're going to set it to e.target.value. Okay, so the text field on the event, we're going to call set link, and then what set link gets, whatever is put inside here as a parameter or as an argument, will be at the end of the day the value of what link will be. Okay, and up here so we can see the changes, I'm going to console log link so we can actually see the changes live. So let's open up my console here, and hopefully you guys can see that. I'm going to type in link, and as you can see, on every single change you will see the state link change, and that also goes for, let's just say, twitter.com, right? So every change you see it happen in the console, so that way we know it's working. Always log your stuff, and if that's something that I've learned, you always want to be logging your work so that you know things are working the way you intend them to be. So now that that's all set up, let's us actually use this and capture our link and actually store it somewhere and use it to make our API calls. All right, so there's going to be two ways that we actually want to get our link and actually submit this thing. So the first way is going to be through the form, and then the second way is going to be through the button. First things first is what we want to do is we're going to make a submit handler. So we're going to say handle or const handle submit. We're going to make this a callback, so it's going to be an arrow function, right? And inside of that, I'm missing this right here. Parameter is going to be e, and first thing is going to be e.prevent default, so that way whenever we actually submit the form, the whole page doesn't just refresh, so we can actually get our link. All right, and then after that, we're going to console.log link. That way we actually know that we're getting it submitted, right? In the form, we're going to add a prop on submit, and this is going to look the same way as what we did on the onChange, and we'll also add something to the button as well. So on submit is going to have a callback. We're going to pass e to it as a parameter, and inside that we're going to call handle submit, and inside of that we were going to pass e. All right, and then the same thing goes for, let's copy this, the button, but instead of on submit, we're going to do on click, because on the click, we want this to do the exact same thing. So let's save that, go back here, refresh our page. Let's type in twitter.com. If I hit enter, you'll see twitter.com right up here in the console. Same thing goes for if I hit submit. On the click, it will handle our submit and enter in twitter.com as our link. So we've successfully captured our input in a piece of state, and now we can use that piece of state to manipulate it, use it in our API calls, and receive some data back. So let's start doing that now and implementing our API call. Let's go back to here. We can delete our console.log, and what we want to do now is actually implement a function in order to call shortcode. So what we're going to do is we're going to say const get link, and this is going to be the callback for that, right? This is actually going to be async, so make sure async. If you guys don't understand async, I would definitely look up the docs on Mozilla. I'm not going to go too in depth onto this, but this function here will be async because we are making an API call we don't need, where it's going to fail immediately if we don't use async. So we need to wait for that data to come back. All right. After we call this, we are going to say await short code, right? So we're calling our API here from the what we imported up here, .get. And now these are methods from within Axios, but these should be pretty straightforward if you've made any API calls before. So API or shortcode.get, and inside that method, we are going to pass it the actual variable that we need. So we're going to call shorten, so /shorten, right? Actually, I think our base, so let me double check our API here. Yes, so we already have the slash here, so we just need shorten. So we can go back here, so we can copy this shorten $URL equals. And that's all we're going to need for right now. So inside of a template literal, and this will make more sense in a second. So we're going to need to store shorten /URL equals. Now remember, shortcode, we put base URL as a initial key inside of this Axios create function here, right? And this is already instantiated when we call this. So shortcode already has our base URL, and then we add this on towards the end as our URL parameter. And now after the equals, we do $ curly brace. This is where we put link. So whatever URL we put in will be put in through this variable, so that way we get shortened $URL equals, and then for example, if I put twitter.com, it will be put in here, and that's what's going to get called for the API. All right, and that goes for any link that we put in. What we're going to do to make this a little bit more readable is I'm going to put the .get down here. Then is going to be another method that we call in here, and actually we're going to put in response as a initial parameter. And this is going to turn into an arrow function. What we want to do with the response is going to be up to us. But in terms of this function, what we actually want to do is store it in another variable, right? Because this response is going to hold our new URL. I don't really want to set this back to another short URL. We're just going to create another one. So we're going to create another piece of state. And we're going to create a variable called short and set short. Okay, very straightforward. So that way we know that it's going to be the short code. We're going to call useState again and set it to a empty string again. So same thing for the link, since this is going to be a link as well. Inside of our response, we want to call set short. Okay, and inside of set short, we're going to say response. Well, first things first, actually. Okay, let's console.log our response, so that way we know exactly what we're getting. All right, so there's our then. We have our response. Once we get a response back, it's going to show up on our console, but we also need to catch the error. So .catch is going to be another method that we have. Inside of that, we have an error parameter that we're going to pass it. If for whatever reason we get an error message, we're going to console.error that error. Okay, very, very straightforward. So again, for this function here, const get link equals an async function. We await shortcode .get shorten URL equals the link. So that is what's going to be called first, and we're going to await that response. Then when we get the response, we want to log whatever we get back. So that's going to contain all of our data. If we get an error, we're going to catch that error and console.error that error. Console.error is just the same thing as log, but it's going to be in an error form. Okay, let's save that. And now when we handle submit, we are going to call get link up here. All right, now let's actually save that, and that's what should be working. So now if we go back to here, let's put in twitter.com. Let's hit enter and wait for something to show up in the console. This will take a second. This isn't going to be a very, very fast API call, but as you guys can see right here, I've got something inside of my console, and this is going to be all of our data. So you guys can see config here. The URL was shortened $URL equals twitter.com. Our method was the get, and it shows the base URL. What we actually want is going to be right here in the data section here. So you see OK is true, and the result, if we pull the result tab down, you can kind of see all the different headers that we get back. So we get full shared link, full short link 2, different kinds of links that you have access to. But what we're going to take is going to be this short link. Now you're going to remember this tree, right? So this whole object here is going to be our response. Within that is going to be separate objects. What we want is going to be response.data.result.short_link. That's exactly the tree that we're going to follow in order to get a response back. So like I said, we can go back here. Instead of console logging our response, okay, let's console log response dot, and it was data.result.short_link. That way we're actually targeting the exact link we want, and we're going to get that link back. So let's save this again and do it one more time. Refresh so we don't have any of this. I'm going to say twitter.com, hit enter. We're going to wait for this to come back. And once it comes back, you will see our short code actually come back. So we're making successful API calls now. So let me copy this and show you guys that it actually works. Right, so we put in twitter.com. Let me take this out because it actually copied what we had in the console. And as you can see, it's actually working, right? So now what does it show if I don't put in an actual URL? So I'm going to say just Twitter. Hit enter, it shows me my console.error, and this is exactly what is going to come back. So the API already does this for us, where it does some validation and some checking on the URL, but later on in this tutorial, we're actually going to get into how to actually check for that and show what we want. But first things first is we actually want to just show our link inside of this component here. So let's get into that right now. All right, so we're going to dynamically show this link that we get back from our response underneath the submit button. How we're going to do that is by doing this. So underneath our button here, or actually, yeah, underneath the form. So this is what we're going to do, right? So we're going to add curly braces here, and this is how we're going to dynamically show something from a variable. So what we're going to say is if short is true and we're going to display a link. So underneath here, let's do this. We're going to add a div here, and within the div, we're going to say short link equals, and then we're going to actually display short. So this should be working. So this will only display if short is equal to true, right? Let's give that a shot. So I'm going to say twitter.com. I submitted it. We don't see a loading. Let's see if it actually works first once we get things back. No, it hasn't worked yet. Oh. So instead of actually console logging it, we actually need to set it. So let's replace the console.log first. Remember how we set short here, or we have a piece of state with short and set short. Right now we have short, but short is set to an empty string, so that's why it's not displaying anything. Instead of the console log here, we're going to set short instead of console logging it. That way we actually have set short being set. Now let's do this again. Let's submit it, wait one more time, and then below the submit button, we should be seeing, there we go. You'll see short link dynamically loaded underneath the button. Let's actually add a style to the button here. So we're gonna add another style. Same thing as the top. We're gonna go margin bottom. And inside the margin bottom, we'll just add another 20 pixels. And that way it's going to space everything out and look pretty clean. All right, so that's how you're going to display the link dynamically. Now let's work on the loading section, and then after the loading section we'll get into URL validation, and then we'll end the tutorial there. Okay, so another piece of dynamic loading underneath the button. What we want to do first is we're actually going to make a third piece of state. So const loading is what I'm going to call it. Actually, we're going to call it is loading because that makes a little bit more sense. Is loading. And then set is loading equals use state. And then the initial value I'm going to set is going to be false because the component is not loading when the page initially renders, right? Now we're going to change two things down here. right? So the button is going to change, and then we're going to add something to underneath the button. So first things first, another dynamic render here. If we're going to say if is loading is not true, right? If is not loading is not true, then we're going to take this button and we're going to move it inside. So for example, everything shows as is, but if I set manually this to true, that component will not render, okay? So if loading is true, that button is gone and is no longer in the DOM, okay? So that is just an example of what we're going to do here. Now, linear progress is going to be the component from Material UI we use for a loading component. So that way we don't have to create our own and waste our time at that, okay? So underneath the button is going to be yet another dynamic render here. We're gonna say if is loading is true, then we are going to call linear progress, okay? So obviously nothing shows, but if this is set to true, we're going to see our little loading bar here. Now, how cool is that? Okay, very, very sleek, very, very minimal, simple, to the point. You know exactly what's happening. As soon as is loading is set to true, then we are going to have a loading bar show up. Now let's set this back to false, and we will get our button back. Perfect. Everything is working the way we want it. Now we need to tie all of this into our submit, so that way we can actually get this to work the way we want it to and have everything load in order according to whether or not we have a link or not, and whether or not the form was submitted. So let's do that right now. All right, so there's actually going to be two places that we want to have loading change in our instances. One is in the get link, and the second one is going to be in the handle submit. So let's handle those right now. So inside of get link, or inside of our handle submit function, we call get link first. Right after we call get link, we want to set is loading to the opposite of is loading. Now this is just easier for me to write, or for you to write as a developer, so that way you don't have to say set is loading to false or true. This is just going to be, you're going to set is loading to the opposite of whatever value it is. So in this instance, as soon as we call handle submit, is loading is set to false. The opposite of that is true. So this is going to set it back to true. Okay, so we're going to do that. We also want to do set link above that. And above that, we're going to do an empty string again. That way, when we actually submit it, it's going to change the input of that value, or the value of that input, to an empty string, and that way there's nothing left there. So it automatically deletes what you typed in on the input. The second place we want to do set is loading now is going to be after we get our response. So we set short to the response that we get back. So that's our short link. After we finish that, we want to set is loading to false. Okay, this is where I will explicitly say that I want this to be false, because after we get it, I don't want it to be the opposite of whatever it is. I just want it to be false, and that's that. So let's save this and see what we've got so far. So we're gonna go into twitter.com. We're gonna hit enter. Boom, you're going to see the loading bar pop up. And then whenever we get our link back, that loading bar is gone because it's set to false. Our button is back and our short link is right underneath. So you have a perfectly working structure and flow here when it comes to every piece of state, and whenever it is we get our data back from the API in that async function. Now, last part to this that we're going to work on is actually some URL validation. We're going to refactor some of those functions in order to actually implement that URL validation. And then after that, I will let you guys know how to move on with this project and what else you guys can do. So let's do that right now. All right. So URL validation is going to be something that we actually do want in here to make sure that whoever is using this actually implements a correct URL. So how are we going to do that? Let's go back into our code editor here. And that's not our code editor here. All right, there we go. So what we're going to do here is above const search. So above our actual function here, I'm going to create a variable in all caps so I know exactly what it's going to be. And that's going to be http _URL _validator _regex. So we are going to be using some regex here. And that's going to equals, I will copy and paste this, but this will also be in the description for you to use. That way, because this is a lot of mumbo jumbo that I still don't very much understand, but it is regex. And this line of code pretty much says and does exactly what it does. It validates a URL to make sure that somewhere in the text that you input into the input on the actual website, that it matches some form of format of a website. So you see the HTTPS, you see this www dot, right? So it has some form of check there, and we need to make sure that you're actually inputting a correct URL before we send it off to the API, right? Because if it's not a correct URL, I don't want to call the API and keep hitting it. Because if this was an API with limited calls, I don't want to hit it if it's not something that I actually need, right? So let's implement that now. So what we're going to do above our const handle submit is I want to do a function called const validate URL, right? And above validate URL, we're going to make this another arrow function since this is another callback. Inside of that, we're going to put a string as a parameter. You can even name it something like link, but I don't really want to do that since I already have a link state and that can get very confusing. Inside of it, it's very, very simple as far as what you want. All you need to do is return string.match. So we want to match on the variable there. And inside of that method, we are going to pass this. So we want to make sure if the string passed into this function here matches what we have in here. If it at all matches this validation, then it checks and we return. Okay, so inside of our handle submit, we are going to refactor this now in order for us to actually have this work in tandem with everything else. So the only way when we submit this function, right, because handle submit is what gets called either when we submit the form or if we click the button. If that happens, instead of just calling get link, right, we're going to put a conditional here. So if we say if validate URL with link, so we're going to pass in link, which is our initial link that you type in into this URL, or I'm sorry, into this parameter for validate URL. If that's true, then we call all of this right here, right? So just to make sure that you guys are all aware, if validate URL with the link passed in equals to true, right? So if we get back something and it's true and it's not null or anything like that, then we call get link, set the link to 0, and then we set isLoading to the opposite of isLoading, okay? Very, very simple validation. We're gonna save that and let's go into here. Oh, well, let's actually do this first before we move on. I want to actually show, whoever's using this app that instead of logging it in the console, I want to set loading, or I want to show the error like actually visibly on the page. So after this if this returns true, then we do everything that we want. We're going to add an else here, and then we're going to set short inside of that else to please input a valid URL. And there's so many different ways that you could do this, but this is the most simple one that you could do right now. Now, save that. Let's go back to this. Okay, let's refresh. If I do not put in a correct URL, immediately, please input a valid URL is put because that regex did not pass. But if I do twitter.com, so the .com is added, this will stay, the loading will stay, but then once we actually get our shortcode URL, it's going to actually put our shortcode URL. So now with the URL validation, you have a perfectly working shortcode generator with some API calls and some dynamic rendering, all within this small little app. So where to go with this for now? What else you can do? So you could, style this up with Material UI and make this a little bit better. Obviously, it's a very simple UI, so it's not that crazy. You can mess with things like local storage. So one of the ideas that I had of doing was implementing a little table at the bottom of the page and using local storage to store all the shortcodes that you actually generate with, whatever original URL or things like that. Something with local storage in order to store all the links you have so that you can come back to this website and just immediately grab some of those links and not have to do it every single time. But other than that, do what you will with this. You can add a light and dark mode if you want. Go crazy with it. Show me what you guys got. Show me some of the designs or other creations you want to add to this. It's a quick little build, super simple, and hopefully it helps you practice some API calls, some React, and definitely using Material UI. I hope you guys enjoyed my first ever coding tutorial that I've ever recorded. Hopefully it wasn't that bad. I definitely will be improving in the future. This is going to be something that is super uncomfortable for me right now, but I tend and plan to be doing this for a lot longer and more in the future. So if you guys enjoyed this, let me know down in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe because it would genuinely help me out. But I will see you guys on the next one. Peace out.